the way you're raised or biologically. And I think it's more part of that's nature and part of that's nurture, and maybe 10% nature, 90%, yeah, 10% nature, 90% nurture makes us who we are. Both of those things are part of who we are and how we act and how we think and who, the people we become. Experiences you have and the people you're around, especially in the younger years, but also, I think really high school is when people find themselves. That's the phase when people are becoming their own people. So it can be either wonderful or catastrophic. I mean, we went through the rebellious teen phase like everybody does, but the difference is, we did it together. And it is tough to be your own person when you're in the same school, and it's basically like two big fish in one small pond. Nothing ever really negative came of it, but definitely along the way there were moments when I'm sure both of us thought that being a twin was not such a hot thing. Through growing up, I mean, it was consistently the twins, the twins, the twins. Yeah, we were definitely seen as the twins, and it was hard to break free of that. We did spend, an awful lot of time together. And I don't, looking back, I wouldn't have it any other way. I think, of course, like anything, when the times are good and everything is fine, it's not an issue. I don't think, well, I know I never obsessed on it. I never obsessed on it as a negative, and I still don't. But if one of the other of us has done something, and not that I'm prejudiced, but usually it seemed that he did things more than I did things, then, of course, we were on everybody's shit list. Both of us. Yeah, well, it kind of brings a smile to the face to mine. It's true. It's definitely, I remember at times certainly when we would get lumped together as the twins, when I would think, I didn't do anything. Why are you mad at me? Sometimes they won't forget maybe some of the things you wish some people would forget. Because, we're not angels. When one of the other of us pissed somebody off or did something that shouldn't have been done, or got caught doing something that shouldn't have been done, those are the days when you say, I'm not Richard. It wasn't me. I mean, I'm not one that tends to dwell extraordinarily on what I think people think of me. It's just that sometimes the twins become this entity. Oh, yeah. Those Bradley twins. You're never alone. Which may thwart people becoming their own person. It certainly was, and I think continues always to be a struggle of some people just couldn't separate the two. Certainly was the ongoing, are you Richard or David? Well, hold on, I'm not Richard. Look, I'll show you my driver's license and prove to you that I'm not who you think I am. My golly, you look like him. You have an identical twin brother. So, yeah. I'm not Richard. It wasn't me. Oh, yeah, you're one of the twins. But going back to high school, going back more into our teenage years when we were both more involved with this computer club, and we were both sort of in this co-position because, of course, we were twins, so we did it together. We were very popular in our teens as speakers at the club. Mind you, as volunteers at the club. Mostly, I did a lot more than he. Any of those things, we were equal in that, as far as the way I remember it. Oh, I mean, I don't know what the percentage was, but it was vast. It wasn't like 55-45. I think it was pretty much the same. I did most of everything. But at 17, 17, we were giving presentations to 500 people about computers and stuff. But he really hadn't done much of the groundwork and much of the hard work to get it going. So at that point, I think he was riding a bit on my coattails. It was a sort of a Mutt and Jeff comedy presentation of the club, and we were at 17, we were giving 16, 17, we were giving presentations to 500 people, and he continued to want to be part of it and want the credit for it. At 18 years old, we did both successfully run and were board of directors of the club, which you couldn't do until you were 18. Especially on the computer thing, I think I did feel he was holding me back by kind of tugging on my coattails, saying, no, don't forget me, I want to be involved. We did a lot of things that were the same. We were both into, computers. We were both into computers and bowling and motorcycles. The twins. So it wasn't the same, but it was the same.
It's a typical twin thing.
Mind you, I was able to break free from that, I think, kind of when I moved to Florida.
The fact that it ended and we both moved on to other things was a good thing.
It was when I went to Florida.
Well, it happened. Whether or not it was, I'm not sure it was sort of his conscious decision that he had to get away from me when he moved to Florida.
It wasn't, I don't think, so conscious at the time, but I remember
that part of our lives sort of.
Yeah, I would say Florida was the first big separation.
I think it had already ended for me. By the time he left,
it was like a new country, a new everything.
I had already, in many ways, started to move on as an individual in the fact that I got married.
He married before I, and then they moved away.
Maybe he felt...
Certainly, we were going our separate...
Because I'd done it first, more free to do that.
Certainly, we were going our separate ways, and I think it was tough as we were going our separate ways.
I got married very young. I got married at 20.
He got married, and then shortly after I got married and moved to Florida. So we had...
I think it was a year or so later.
Going back to my first marriage, which failed.
When Dave moved to Florida and subsequently got married.
That was the turning point.
I have to admit, I felt, for me, a sense of loss when he moved to Florida. Just that distance.
Okay, well, back to the first marriage. It lasted about 4.5 years. And
he had indicated that wasn't really going so well. Then at one point...
Well, obviously because it didn't last. It didn't go well. And actually, looking back, I suspect I probably wasn't really ready.
Things were not going well in Florida, on business, on family, on anything. It was a real tough situation, and knowing he was in it was hard for me.
I do remember, and I will never forget, and I'm sure he will not either, for different reasons.
I certainly distinctly remember that sense of despair, stress, loss, just sort of... It was hard to get through that separation part of it.
And I don't think I understood.
Just seeing things that I felt were signs that maybe there were relationship problems or whatever. And
I don't think I understood how much it affected him until they came down to visit once.
I certainly felt completely helpless as far as being in any kind of control or any kind of way to help from so far away.
And apparently they were getting ready to leave, or even driving down the street to go.
Having to basically drive away, being able to, really do nothing about it.
When apparently Richard pulled over and had a somewhat of a breakdown.
Oh, it was very, very hard.
But I think it was probably best for him and I that we did get our space, and when I was in Florida.
I think it was a good thing.
I think I did find it...
And maybe the only good thing about when he did go to Florida.
Not liberating, but there wasn't... Nobody knew I had a twin, so it was...
I wasn't a twin.
It was just me.
And I guess, at this point...
It was good and bad. It was tough at times.
It is a struggle. It was a struggle because, in fact, the more I become an individual, I guess arguably someone would say maybe the less I am of what I was born, a twin.
We are one, but we are not one. We are our own selves.
The closer I am to myself, the farther I am from, or becoming myself, the farther I am from Dave.
And I think it makes it tough for all twins to break free and be themselves until they do move on to separate lives.
But I don't remember ever consciously sitting down and thinking to myself, how do I not be a twin? How do I be an individual?
It for us it's normal to have a twin, and I think it's good to have a twin, and not all the people, but lots of people wish they had a twin.
My answer to that is I've never not had a twin brother, so I really don't know what you mean. It's just normal life to me.
But certainly it does come with some bad moments, and
I don't really see it. I mean, I am who I am. He is who he is. We do have separate.
I mean, we'll always be twins. It's just that much of our lives at the moment, it really isn't a big factor in it.
There have been different things that paths we've taken. I mean,
Well, certainly he is a family man. He has 4 children.
that is a huge part of who I am and why I am, and everything else as it ties into me as an individual and a father and a grandfather and just who I am.
So I know that takes time, and
That's where my focus is, and that's where 99% of the time my decision of where I've got to be and what I've got to do are going to be based on.
so I always try to be around and involved and available, but not in the way.
You're into real life.
I've always been conscious of that.
It's just a reality.
So we do our things, and we're twins, but we don't have to sort of be living in our back pockets.
And it's one of those realities that
Our lives often intertwine a bit here and there, but I would say that if you looked at a sine wave, that right now we are at the outer edge of the sine wave, and
yeah, it's interesting.
and I suspect probably both of us would rather that to change.
I've honestly never really asked him. I know we both,
I think we're both very competitive, stubborn at times.
I guess, and it's part of that competition thing.
Oh, I think that's probably pretty true.
I don't think it's a big shock to anyone who's into the twin thing.
It's funny, the more things change, the more they stay the same, because
Honestly, it does sometimes even subliminally feel like that for 43 years we've been trying to outdo each other, and in one aspect of life or another.
and certainly I find at times the conflicts, but not necessarily directly, but the indirect conflicts are quite painful to deal with.
No question.
And it should not be that way.
It's something we just do.
Not recently, because of course we haven't been spending that much time together, but
Certainly I've done things that I regret doing, or said things I regret saying.
anyway, I don't know why that has all come about.
It's not just because of the twin thing. It used to be that.
I think it's more of a man thing, maybe than a twin thing.
I don't think we ever get to that, sort of fuzzy, wormy, touchy-feely sort of I forgive you thing.
But hopefully at some point soon we'll head back towards having more time to be around each other.
There's a lot of distance, like geographical distance. We don't see a lot, particularly that much of each other.
But I do hope, I hope actually that this project might help with some of that.
Well,
We will see.
I guess that's kind of how I like to end it, and just
I would say anybody who can say that they have a set of truly identical siblings in their life should cherish the time with them and get to know each one as themselves, and rejoice in their twinness, but also in their individuality.
we are very much the same, and we have our differences, but and differences between each other, and tough times and all of those things. But it's a till death do us part. We will always be twins.
I have pondered this from time to time because it is pretty much inevitable.
Let's face it, we may have come into the world on the same day, but there's a good chance we're not going out of the world on the same day.
It is pretty much inevitable that unless we are together and some tragic accident takes us at the same time, that
Somebody, who knows who, one of the two of us, is someday not going to have a twin brother.
one of us is eventually going to be left without the other.
Boy, it's a tough one.
Whether it be disease or accident or
it's a real tough one.
That is a tough one.
And
I think it would be tough to be the survivor, because undoubtedly there will be things that were not said that should have been said, and that will lead to whatever time the other one has left with probably some regrets and pain.
There was a show on, and I don't remember the network, that had a photographer who had taken piles and piles of pictures and done interviews, not unlike this, with various sets of twins.
And in some ways, as much as I do not want to, I mean, I'm in no hurry to die and not be around. I think it would be tough to be the survivor.
And I think the most moving moment for me in one of those shows was he had been in the process of interviewing a pair of twins that I seem to remember were both very athletic, and in fact were bike racers. And
I think it will be tough for any twin or any multiple, or I suppose any sibling, but twins are different, to be the survivor.
One of them had been struck by I don't remember if it was a car, a bus, or a truck or something on his bicycle, and instantly killed.
And know that that they will not be seeing them ever again.
And the pictures and the follow-up interview and all that stuff with the surviving twin. I mean, I was crying. I was absolutely devastated by that portrayal and what had happened, because, of course, it brings it home. I mean,
I'm not wanting to die, and I certainly don't want us to go in some tragic accident, but
that reality hit me like a ton of bricks that day.
I think it would be tough. I think I could do it, but in some ways, kind of, I suppose, like after an atomic bomb, the living will envy the dead.
It was very, very hard to watch and very hard to hear of this other twin. I believe was from the United States, and just the raw emotion of his suffering when this had happened to his brother.
Well, well, I guess that's kind of how I like to end it. And all I would say, just to anybody out there who encounters twins in your life, that twins are people too. Sometimes they are more of a like a pack of dogs running around together, probably when they're young. But try and find the differences and the things that make them unique, more than just lumping them in together as one entity.
Part of the reason when I heard about doing this is why I did this. I actually had this conscious thing today, is that this project is something where who knows who from where.
I would like to think, and I suspect that somehow or another, no matter when it is, that they're looking us up on Wikipedia, and whoever writes whatever,
we'll see this and say, oh yeah, those Bradley twins, because that's what we are and what we have been.
And I could probably talk for hours, but I'm beat.
For better or for worse, we are and always will be twins.
So, as Forrest Gump would say, that's all I have to say about that.
And whatever the differences are, people still go, hey, Dave. And I say, hey, I'm Richard. And they say, oh, yeah, you are. And I am.
My full name is David Ronald Bradley.
Okay, I'm Richard Donald Bradley.
And there is a story behind that.
There is a story. We are twins, but my mother was not aware that she was having twins.
And
Richard David Bradley was going to be the name of their son, if they had a son.
So, when suddenly there were two of us,
they went with Richard and David. That's David.
Cheers.
That's Richard.
Aha.
I'm not really sure whether Ronald and Donald came into it.
My mother was Doris, my father was Robert, so they were dealing with the DR and the RD somehow. So that is how it came to be.
David Ronald Bradley and
Richard Donald Bradley.
The twins.
Well, Richard is the older. He was born first.
July 30th, 1965 in Toronto at what was then called New Mount Sinai Hospital.
He was born first by 5 minutes.
I was born first.
By 5 minutes.
I think maybe Dave finds it somehow, I don't know, has some issue with being second.
It's a funny thing, when I got married, he got up and told a story about, well, David always says that twins are actually the same age because they're conceived at exactly the same moment.
Because one time he did actually give me the whole speech about conception and fact that, we are in fact the exact same age. At which point I agreed with him completely and then said...
Then he paused and said, but I was born first.
I don't think consciously ever really make a big deal out of it.
It really isn't a big thing.
That's where life began, and we were at that time, so I've been told, combined heavyweights at almost 14 pounds total weight between us.
And apparently when we were tiny,
apparently, I don't know if it was 2 or 3 times, our parents actually took us back to the hospital to have us, double checked with our footprints because they'd mixed us up as infants. But apparently the one that was able to tell us apart all the time,
my sister Ruth could always tell us apart.
And it was based on
she said that whenever we cried, it was different, and she could tell by that.
If one of us were crying, she would, without a doubt, 100% accuracy, be able to say, that's David, or that's Richard.
We had, on Rowe Avenue in Toronto, there were these 2 houses side by side. They were actually semi-detached, so like one building, but 2 separate houses.
They'd been in the family since the 20s and 30s, when my grandparents and great-grandparents had bought them side by side.
And we lived in the 2 houses side by side, but we lived in both.
When we were young, maybe 3 or 4 years old, my dad cut a couple of doors through, so as much as there were 2 addresses,
147, 149 Rowe Avenue,
there were these doors, so it became just one big house.
And then we both ended up in the corner rooms.
Because of the layout of the 2 semi-detached houses, there were mirror rooms on either side, and we ended up...
I guess going into high school, it was more important to have our own space, and that is, I think...
Where we actually did end up in, as it was kind of amusing, it was identically sized rooms.
And that is, I think, when I discovered, once again, that we were very much the same and that we had too much stuff.
Wall to ceiling, floor to floor.
But definitely I was neater about having too much stuff.
Yeah, I think so. I think...
I was better at storing things more neatly than he.
It's true. I believe it's 100% true that...
I think back to our rooms when we were young. Mine had shelves and things mostly on the shelves, and his mostly just had stuff all over.
Dave wins. He wins big time.
That continues up to today, but there is one great quality I think that he has, is that somehow he manages not to be able to see it.
If it's a busy day and and something is out of place, I may not be the first one to put it in the place it's supposed to be in.
Which I think, considering that he has to be around it all the time, that it's not a bad thing that he cannot see.
So as much as I'll give him full points for being the king pack rat, he is the much better organized, neater pack rat. Hands down.
Well, it's a funny thing. My dad, of course, had too much stuff.
I guess it was hereditary in a lot of ways.
He was also, of course, a pack rat.
And, we know because we went through, had to go through everything that he left us behind. And
certainly when we were growing up, there was too much around, and certainly not much was thrown out.
Sometimes there'd be, I remember a whole... like a basket of broken tools of various kinds.
My dad, of course, had too much stuff, but see, he grew up during the war and during the Depression where you saved everything.
And I remember I talked to him about it a couple of times, and I said, well, why did you buy that rusty old, whatever it was, a chisel or whatever?
My dad was such a pack rat.
And he says, well, it's dull and right now, and it cost me $1, but if I put it in this blue chemical thing and redo it and put it on a grinder and everything else. He says, that's as good as a brand new chisel that would have cost me, $22.95.
I don't remember how many television sets there were after he died when we were cleaning things out. But certainly it was, I think, more than 40 and less than 50.
I mean, we know because we had to go through everything that he left us behind.
And I didn't think I would tell the story, but I will.
That was the house I think I mentioned before my dad spent his entire life in.
147, 149 Rowe Avenue.
And we grew up there. And
it was actually when my dad died, which was not a good time.
My grandmother pretty much insisted because I certainly had no plans of moving back to Rowe Avenue at that point. I was living in Richmond Hill, and I was...
But then I came back, and it was actually when my dad died.
And my grandmother just declared that... well, you have to move back because she says, I can't look after the houses.
She did have a way of getting under, I think, everybody's skin at times.
And I don't want to sell them. And I think it'd be good if you moved back to the neighborhood with your kids. So, they could go to the same school you did and the same school your dad did and all the rest of that.
Nagging away.
My grandmother pretty much insisted.
That's when I came back to Toronto.
So we did move back, and... eventually, as Dave resettled in Toronto, he resettled into the other house.
So like one building, but two separate houses. And we ended up living in either side of them. So
there were debates at the time about who would live in which house, 147 or 149.
I think we're both very competitive, stubborn at times.
And I can't deny that it's not the one-upmanship. There's still just...
I don't think it's something... that we've really...
It's not the one-upmanship. There's still just still a bad taste in my mouth over why and how we end up leaving Rowe Avenue.
There were issues, I think, around the move and such that probably haven't been...
So it's caused various aspects of moving out of Rowe Avenue for both sides of the family. Us, like as far as Dave and I.
But also, I think at times there is... interference probably from both of our spouses on issues.
Maybe stretching into the in-laws, that it's created some friction over how it happened. What happened, and this goes back to the pack ratism. What happened to the stuff that was in the houses, where it ended up, why it ended up where it was, why so much storage had to be, all of these things. But
there's this competition, and I think it's all come about since my father died mostly, about sort of who is the one to maintain the family heritage or tradition or things or stuff.
I mean, estate matters are always difficult on families.
I mean, we are all stewards of we all carry the same family name.
And especially because my dad did not have a will.
That has not helped matters.
Everyone has opinion of what you should do and how it should be done or how things should be divided.
But I think he is more negatively influenced by his wife than I am by mine.
I mean, estate matters are always difficult on families, and unfortunately in some instances they do tend to bring out I guess sometimes the worst in people.
But I think I'm better at sort of putting distance between what my wife says and what and saying no, don't, because these things seem to come up with his wife.
I can say with some authority that sometimes the in-law relationships I think have been more strained maybe with us than others.
These things seem to come up with his wife. For example, when we moved and they were doing the cottage thing, I had a lamp at the cottage.
There have been different things that,
I had a lamp at the cottage, which I bought at a garage sale, of course.
It wasn't so much about, there wasn't about money.
And it's a very ugly lamp, and I don't know anyone would like it, but it's so ugly I like it.
More on probably, little things, mementos and stuff like that.
But when I removed it from the cottage, because it was mine, and I was doing what I thought was supposed to be done, apparently this caused quite an uproar, and continues to.
It got complicated.
And somebody would say, oh, well, just give her the lamp. Well, if I really didn't like it, I wouldn't have bought it.
Everyone has opinion of of what you should do and how it should be done or how things should be divided.
The false peace would be just give her the lamp because, he's mad because she's mad and everybody's mad. But that's not really peace. That's just giving in.
It's tough.
Peace is saying, helping them understand that they're wrong.
I think it goes both ways. They
in her mind, she thinks she's right, but she's not. And I think he more blindly backs her up than I would do with Stephanie. Like, if I know she's wrong, I'll tell her she's wrong.
I mean, estate matters are always difficult on families.
And I think he knows that she's wrong about this lamp. I think. Or maybe he doesn't know.
It got complicated. And it mostly revolved around houses and all that sort of stuff.
I mean, we all have too much stuff. And when there is stuff to be had because of a tragedy,
and this goes back to the pack-ratism.
I'm more likely to say, well, I don't sit around waiting for people to die to get the lamp or the this or the that or whatever.
What happened to the stuff that was in the houses? Where it ended up?
But certainly, if there are things that I'm liking, or that are available, and it's something that I think would go well with the rest of my stuff or my pack rat tendencies.
I'm not going to claim size or anything, but I mean...
now, one would think that was a fight between she and I, and that's what it should have been.
As much as I'll try and, play the peacemaker role, if that's possible in a situation.
And I think he knows that she's wrong about this lamp. I think.
If I have to choose between, my wife Sandy...
Or maybe he doesn't know.
He's gonna be second, and if a conflict... or a potential conflict is there.
There was no sort of in-between of, oh, well, if you just could see it from her perspective. There was no perspective from her side that made any sense at all.
I guess it's kind of like the throne in England and, who's in line for it. And every time somebody else comes into my immediate family in Moor Falls, it's, I guess, pushing Dave that one step further away from ascendancy.
Now, I don't think that his wife is a terrible, terrible bully, but I think that she certainly has a way of making life hell for him if she feels like it.
My wife, my kids, my granddaughter, and that part of the family, I mean, they are my number one priority.
That sort of blind sort of, oh yes, she's right because she's my wife is definitely...
And they're going to be forever. And that sometimes means that that maybe Dave's not going to be happy with something that I do or don't do.
Anyway,
it will always come down to, who I live with, who I hope I'm spending the rest of my life with after 23 years, and the fact that that is my wife.
Anyway, I think spouses of any twins will have a rough time in resolving these things.
It will be, to death do us part.
Twins are always going to have a bond that people don't get, they don't understand, and spouses must understand that they don't have to understand it, they just have to deal with it.
And I'm hoping to spend every last day of my life as close to Sandy or with her as I can.
Anybody who gets involved with a twin will always have to compete somewhat with the twin because, as some people would say, they were womb mates.
I think it becomes a threatening thing to girlfriends or spouses or potential ones.
They were womb mates, and you can't just break that bond.
Because it's a bond that is just there, that always will be. And that it can be threatening because...
people who are not twins don't get it.
Because maybe they think they'll never get that kind of understanding or closeness that we have, or that they think we have.
And I think some people would feel threatened by that.
Sometimes maybe it's, farther than the reality, but...
there's no reason to be threatened by that. They just have to understand if you're going to get involved with a twin... it's not that it's, it's 3 of you or 4 of you, it's occasionally, but there will be times when the twins come first.
I guess part of it is, yeah, sure, we're close, and we certainly have, the experiences of
People who aren't twins, they can never understand what it's like to have a twin.
my wife Sandy, or Lisa back then, or Stephanie now in his life. I mean, they will never know. They'll never be able to. I don't think they'll ever fully understand, and can never understand what it's like to be a twin, because they're not.
I mean, for us, it's just normal. It's natural.
That automatic, twin thing, the bond.
And it's funny, it's not exactly related to this, but I remember when we were going through this marriage course, Stephanie and I, this woman said about her husband, she said, "There's nobody that can make me laugh harder or more goddamn mad than my husband."
I don't think I'd be who I am, the kind of person I am, I don't think I'd be the same person at all if I were not a twin.
But I would say, like that lady said, that nobody can make you laugh harder or appreciate life more than your twin, but nobody can make you so goddamn mad than your twin.
I guess it's like being married, for better or for worse. We are and always will be twins, and
certainly the good times together, there is nothing like.
It's a till death do us part. We will always be twins.
But certainly the sibling rivalries at times and the other things are more heightened and more maddening and more angering and perhaps more miserable and bitter.
And I really understand that comment about the best thing in my life and the worst thing in my life. It can be...
I mean, everybody tells us we're supposed to be close and there's supposed to be this wonderful bond.
It can be that, and that can be in the same minute.
But sometimes it doesn't happen. And it can be much worse because we're not supposed to be this angry. But I would say...
I guess there's still some lingering stuff about the moving out of Roe Avenue and those kind of things, which...
It is not fun to be fighting with your twin, especially when it's a fight that doesn't need to be fought and is brought on by other people.
I guess it's hard to explain, but I guess it's not a real warm, fuzzy relationship between Stephanie and I, or between Dave and Sandy, or between each other. It's cool and cordial, and there's a lot of distance.
Well, it's a funny thing. I think it's kind of like the Cold War in some ways, in that and it's never really been dealt with.
Well, I think it would. I don't think there's one particular, punch him out, drag him out situation. But I think
the worst sort of thing has been the events leading up to and after, and I guess in some ways it still lingers on, about when we moved.
I think more a lingering thing that had occurred was ongoing...
oh my God, here we go again.
There's still just still a bad taste in my mouth over why and how we end up leaving Roe Avenue.
Another family trait we have is that nobody tells anybody what really the issue is. Everybody knows, but no one will talk about it.
Those kind of things were probably the longest running sort of saga of conflict and hard feelings left.
It's a funny thing. I think it's kind of like the Cold War in some ways.
I mean, it really comes down to me to the question of this day is...
Nothing is said, but once again, probably through outside interference, there's more lingering resentment over probably things that never happened.
I mean, it really comes down to me to the question of this day is, how could he have ever chosen to sign into a deal that involved me having to sell the house that I had inherited without asking me?
Oh God, here we go again.
Dave went out and looked at in fact, I guess the house we're sitting in now.
Oh my God, here we go again.
Arranged a deal, to buy it, and met all the conditions, and in fact we're signing papers to sell one half of a semi-detached house that I lived in the other half of, and he never asked me if I wanted to move.
You know, I know in this whole moving bit, although it was the right thing to do, that there was tension brought up.
You know, I mean, I could have said no.
I know there was tension, and for a while they wouldn't come here.
No, I don't want to move. I don't want to sell. This is not, the time for me to do that. And which would have, left him in a hell of a mess.
For a while they wouldn't come here.
What would he do about having signed in to buy this house here in Unionville?
I don't know, what exactly or how. Of course, once again, I was never really told what the issue was.
He never asked me if I wanted to move.
But really, like anything, I mean, if you make it an issue, it can be. But if you just accept it and move on, it doesn't have to be.
Still to this day, honestly, I don't know. As much as I got a couple of text messages or MSN messages that they were looking at houses.
Stephanie really was the one who got the ball rolling on going.
And then it ended up we had a terrible time with selling the houses.
If it were not for her, we would not have moved.
A little over 2 years ago, we moved from the street where, in fact, my dad spent his entire life on Rowe Avenue in North Toronto.
So anyway, we did get it all sorted out. It wasn't that big an issue.
But it was the homes we grew up in.
Stephanie really was the one who got the ball rolling on going, but it was the time to go. And looking at the economic disaster that has ensued and housing prices gone down, we got out at just the right time.
Well, I mean, it happened whether or not it was...
We moved and
we both had in front of us the identical task. So, here it is, two identical twins with the identical task in two houses side by side, practically twin houses.
147, 149 Rowe Avenue.
And in fact, just as full with very, sort of the similar stuff.
There was lots of stuff in there.
And the approach that I took at that time was, I gotta get a dumpster.
There was lots to do because, of course, Dad, being a pack rat, had stuff to clean up.
And Dave did put some stuff in the dumpster on both loads, but...
I suppose, like anybody who's a pack rat, there's always a good reason for keeping things.
The good stuff, and that's always a debatable point about what's the good stuff.
I have got rid of some stuff.
Dave did put some stuff in the dumpster on both loads, but predominantly I filled those dumpsters twice.
I've sold some stuff on eBay.
At the same time, I don't know, I couldn't even tell you how many storage units that Dave rented and filled to the, wall to ceiling, floor to floor of boxes and boxes and boxes of probably some of the stuff, I'm sure some of the stuff that I put in the dumpster.
I did save the front door from the house we used to be in, which I really didn't need to.
You just can't let go of some things like that. And I think to his own financial detriment, because some of those things are in paid storage.
There's always a good reason for keeping things.
Hell, one day he came by the garage when I was trying to get some stuff for the dumpster, and he probably took 6 boxes out of my garage of stuff that I was going to put in the dumpster and put them in storage.
But I'm trying to find a happy balance.
So, I'd like to think I'm a reforming pack rat in that I see the burden of having everything I have.
So,
we did move.
We got out at just the right time.
And Dave lives here and I live where I live. And
now we are both free to do what it is that we want to do. But I know
it was an altering thing to our relationship. And
certainly, because we're not so close physically, we have not been hanging out together as much.
We're separated by distance, and there's still some, I guess there's still some lingering stuff about the moving out of Rowe Avenue and those kind of things, which I guess will always be there and certainly have changed the landscape a bit.
But mind you, hopefully sometime we will get those resolved, or perhaps both learn to listen to our spouses less.
There's a lot of distance, like geographical distance. We don't see a lot, particularly that much of each other.
And probably relations between all of us over time will improve because we don't have to live next to each other.
But I don't think there's animosity or anger particularly. It's just, we're family, and
it's not a bad thing that we are now more so, not just at work, but more so living very much away from each other, because I think that will give both spouses a chance to understand that the things that they brought up were really not issues terribly worth bringing up.
As I believe my father-in-law, Earl Paquette, spoke at my wedding, and he says, you don't get to choose your family.
Sometimes distance is not a bad thing.
Familiarity sometimes breeds contempt.
But I think in calm reflection, which I think I do better than probably Stephanie or Sandy, which is Richard's wife, or Richard, is that it was best that we move.
I'm happy with the results, I have to say. I'm happy that I now own what was once the family cottage.
They decided they wanted to buy the cottage from everybody,
having been able to take the money from the sale of the house and buy the parts of it I needed to buy from both my brother and my sister.
I kind of always thought they wanted to go to the cottage.
At that point, I did have the money to buy them out, and I knew they didn't have the money to buy me out.
And I do remember Richard getting quite not hostile, but quite.
I ended up, I'm usually not the mean guy. I'm usually I did a thing on the internet yesterday. I'm the peacemaker.
Mind you, I do think back to a thing at the cottage some years ago.
But I told them in no uncertain terms that if they would not let me buy them out of the cottage, that I wanted out and it was going to be sold.
I remember one time specifically, we were at the cottage, and I had 3 dogs at the time. And I came up, it was late in August, or maybe early September, to go to the Kinmount Fair.
If they had refused, I would have,
I took the dogs into the garage because that's where they stayed. I wanted to get to the fair.
I would have packed up my stuff and moved out and said, well, sell it, buy me out.
And then his wife decided,
I'm happy that I now own what was once the family cottage.
That instead of actually taking garbage to the dump,
I never in my wildest dreams thought I would be able to own the cottage as a home.
Knowing full well, of course, that my dogs were in there.
I mean, I will never move again. There's nowhere else I would rather live.
She put them into the garage where there was no doubt that my dog, one of them especially, who was old and on medication that made her insatiably hungry, would get into it.
We have a beautiful lake, not the biggest lake, but a lake that's very, big enough to have fun on.
So I come back from the fair thinking that all is well and good and fine. And when I opened the door, I thought, and I don't know what was in the garbage, but obviously it was everywhere.
We have almost 300 feet of lakefront.
And I was mad. Ooh. Because now I'm wondering, okay, do I have to take them to the vet? What have they eaten? What have they got into? God knows what was in there. Was there sharp things? Are they cut?
It's a little under 1.5 acres.
So, stupidity, I can understand.
Lots of room for the dog to run,
Thinking that putting the bags into the garage was ever a good idea was there was no logic to it. It was just fucking dumb. I can understand somebody being fucking dumb. What I really cannot tolerate and cannot understand is the defense of stupid.
If I could walk away from Toronto tomorrow and never come back, I would be completely happy.
And he tried to defend her stupidity.
I hope that I will actually get to retire and spend many happy retirement years there.
But there was no doubt. I wanted no part of it. I didn't want to hear it. There was no defense for this stupidity.
This is when the cottage was sort of shared.
It was fucking stupid, dumb.
These kind of things coming up and other things around the cottage showed to me that we could never happily share the cottage.
That could have, if he had continued and not left right there, that could have quite easily turned into a fight, as in fight, drag him out, everything fight, where I think if it had gone that far, I would have rubbed his face in the garbage if he continued to try and defend the stupidity. So thankfully, he thought better of it and left.
Cottages and shared properties have a way of becoming, trench warfare battlegrounds.
And it's a funny thing about like where we've moved to. I kind of always thought they wanted to go to the cottage, but I didn't think it was often the best option or the best choice, but that's what they've decided on. And I don't know if that goes into competition. I think
I'm glad that, as far as I'm concerned, I have heaven on earth at Moor Falls, Ontario. But there is still the taste of the deal, and not being consulted before I was essentially pushed out of the house
I
that
think
I had no plans of being pushed out of.
and I may have said something like this before. I think he holds, um, I think grudges longer.
You know, I don't know why, but
There's this competition, and I think it's all come about since my father died, mostly.
it's always I can't remember when it wasn't there, and and the word one upmanship, I know, is one that echoes in my ears from my dad's voice, because I know it aggravated the hell out of him.
And who knows, maybe it's because both thinks that the other is better,
Yeah, it's been one of those things that's a lifelong thing.
that we just have to keep showing that, oh yes, no, you're not better, I'm better.
I guess, and I don't know if it's the same for all twins or not, but
I think the competition has not necessarily always been a good thing.
with regards to, it could be anything. It could be a game of pool.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because just while we were getting ready today,
He asked me if I'd like to play a game of pool.
it's funny, I've been practicing, and I thought I was doing okay, but
You know, him playing on his home court and his home table, racked them up and shot, and
I couldn't sink anything. And he, I mean, I started off well, but that competitive thing kicked in.
at one point in the game, when I missed a shot,
He sank the 8 ball, and I was done. 3 balls left on the table.
he had 3 balls left on the table. He declared, "I've got you now," or something along those lines.
That competitive thing kicked in, and suddenly the tables literally were turned.
He missed the next shot.
And before I knew what was happening,
I made a couple of okay shots, sank the black, and won the game with leaving him with 3 balls on the table. And
I don't know how it happened. Shouldn't be that way.
hey, I won the game. I felt good about it, but I think he was a little crestfallen.
I was just off my game. But, I'll get him next time.
We've played over the years, and sometimes I win, and sometimes I lose, and sometimes I make good shots, and sometimes I don't.
So I don't find the competition in some cases has been terribly helpful.
It's something we just do, and live through, and I guess it's just part of us.
I remember going back to another sport thing, which I forgot about.
I've never figured out how to stop it. Like I said, we're doing it today.
Like, certainly people would compare us at our main sport, which was bowling.
Bowling, which we both did for, I think, between the ages of 5 and 18.
And I'm sure this did not thrill him, but over the years...
Oh, for sure. Actually, as far as average, which of course you get as you bowl, he always carried a higher average than I did.
I would consistently have a higher average than he at bowling, and I would certainly get into more tournaments.
The way it worked in the bowling alley was,
I never got to bowl in the nationals because my average was so high, or higher than other people at the alley, that I would bowl by myself and everyone else would be put on the team.
the person with the high average who made the team would bowl singles, so they'd bowl on their own.
And every time I was not on the team and I was bowling by myself, the team would go to the nationals, and he was on the team. So even though I think I was better and I put more time into it,
he carried a higher average and did better day by day.
I never made it to the big show.
I guess, and it's part of that competition thing. Do I think I had overall better success? I think I did. But I was playing on a team.
I never made it to the big show.
He had it much harder. He had to bowl singles, and if you're not having a good day,
that's the way the ball bounces.
I remember better when I do well than when I don't, but it has its negative as much as sometimes it's fun.
In terms of the way a lot of this competition has turned out, I think it has driven us apart.
It certainly has a negative side to it that honestly some days I wish wasn't there.
And really, when it comes down to...
It could be anything.
Like, certainly people would compare us.
I mean, over different times in our lives, there have certainly been weight differences. I don't think we're identically sized right now. I'm not sure. But we're close.
But definitely along the way.
Well, it runs all through our lives.
I think maybe I didn't have it so tough because I think I was considered to be. I mean, we were both bigger than we should have been, but I think I weighed a little bit less.
I really don't have a scorecard,
so I'm sure it was tougher being the bigger twin.
I honestly have no idea if we're 5 pounds apart, 10 pounds apart, 20 pounds apart, or if we actually weigh the same.
But the weight thing, that is a tough one.
I really don't have a scorecard.
Well, it's gone back and forth. I mean, I think neither one of us wishes that we were as big as we are.
But it is different when you see somebody else, as opposed to the mirror.
Actually, it's not that I eat too much, because I shouldn't be this big. My demon, really, is Coca-Cola. Or caffeinated things, but mostly Coca-Cola.
Well, I used to be a pretty good Coca-holic.
Which I would go back to the caffeine and how we're probably both hooked on that.
But as much as I will have one, a Coke or a Pepsi, whatever it may be.
And I'm trying, of course, always. But of course, I have a Coke here.
I'm over that aholic part of it.
I do probably have an addictive personality in that once I'm into a routine, it is hard to get out of that routine.
I don't dislike it. I'll have one. But I could go a week, I could go 2, I could go...
Thankfully, it wasn't like heroin or smoking or anything like that. I suppose I do probably have an addictive personality.
I could go a week, I could go 2, I could go, whatever. And I don't feel, I'm not going into withdrawal symptoms over Coke.
Too many calories, too much sugar, too much crap. But I'm hooked.
But yeah, it is reminding when I see Dave.
I somehow think that until we both get it beat and confronted, neither one of us will.
I mean, a few years ago, I guess maybe 3 or 4, I had actually managed to lose, I think it was 53 pounds.
A couple of years ago, I think Richard had lost some weight.
And I was, within striking distance of what I thought was a reasonable goal to, try and get to 225 pounds and stay there. And I
don't think he's been continued to be successful with that. I think it's mostly come back.
I'm not there. I'm not near there. And in fact, I'm probably pretty much where I was before I started doing it.
And I know at one point I was smaller, but it's certainly come back.
It's tough.
I don't think I made a conscious effort to gain weight back, but certainly it did happen. And actually, Richard at one point, I remember, said something, and I thought, you bastard.
I do remember.
As I had lost some, and once again, I don't know how much it was, but I remember once he kind of said, it won't last.
I guess, and it's part of that competition thing.
Which I found rather disheartening, but maybe the bad thing also was because it didn't last. Because I'm not sure if I now weigh more than I ever have, but I'm certainly in the range of it.
I have fallen off the wagon, and I'm back at wherever I'm at. I don't particularly obsess with a scale.
But I will, once again over the summer, make efforts to give up Coke and drink more water.
I hope to take on the battle again.
And if both of us are going to do it, we have to do it because we want to and we know it's the right thing. We can't do it for somebody else.
Hopefully I can... figure out how to do it again.
Now, if we teamed up together, maybe we could do it together. I don't know. But, yes, weight has been a battle.
I think it's something that's going to be with me for the rest of my life.
It continues to be a battle, and I somehow think that until we both get it beat and confronted, neither one of us will.
That's genetics. That's hereditary.
My dad was bigger than he should have been.
Not unlike the two of us, certainly struggle with weight. And he wasn't as tall as we are. We're about 5'7", and he was, I think, maybe more like 5'4", 5'5".
My dad was bigger than he should have been, which I think probably had something to... people say, oh, well, you're big, so you have sleep apnea. I think you have sleep apnea, then you get big because you do other things to stay awake.
I wouldn't... If he hadn't been diagnosed, I wouldn't have been diagnosed because I had no idea what sleep apnea is.
Basically, sleep apnea means you never get rest. Every time you go to sleep, you stop breathing. You almost wake up. You don't die, but you're not really resting.
Dave was diagnosed in Florida.
It's a funny thing because it was my first wife and ex-wife who figured out that there was something going on with this. Snoring is a big part of it.
But without him being diagnosed and explaining, what he was going through and the drowsiness and all of those things, I wouldn't have...
For anyone who's had sleep apnea who gets help and get it sorted out, I realized that you can sort of wander along in a bit of a fog for a while. And because basically sleep apnea means you never get rest.
Dave was diagnosed in Florida and was more severe.
And I started on what's called the CPAP machine.
I've had that machine since 1991 or 2. It's been a long time.
And it was after I was on the CPAP machine that I did have somewhat of an awakening as to some of the situations that were going on with my first wife that I really couldn't put up with.
Things were not going well in Florida.
It was around the time that my dad died that things fell apart with my first wife.
It was, I guess, just after Dad died that Dave did come back to Toronto and stay.
It was like the straw that broke the camel's back. I'd put up with a lot of shit, and finally I said, that's it.
And that was, the beginning of the end of that marriage, that relationship.
Right. So after I was diagnosed with sleep apnea, I had talked to my dad about it, and he seemed quite concerned.
From what he said, I think he knew that, something was up.
And it was ironic that not long after that, when he got sick and died, and he was only 59, that the first thing out of their mouth was, well, we think he had sleep apnea for 30 or more years. It was never diagnosed, never treated. And over the years, it damaged his heart.
I guess it was hereditary in a lot of ways.
I mean, sleep apnea doesn't kill you, but the things that it does over the years do.
Like his heart was not in great shape. They didn't have a whole lot of options, I think, for him, probably because of his size and other things.
I guess what he basically had was a clot that broke free and then damaged his intestine and killed it. And anyway, that led to the end. But really, it was...
No. Oh, it was very, very hard.
Oh my God.
He died August the 20th, 1991.
Apparently, for the previous 2 or 3 months leading up to that, my dad had not been well. But nobody told me a thing.
I had been in to see him August the 19th in the evening of 1991 at Sunnybrook Hospital here in Toronto.
And this is sort of a twin moment. I was driving along in Florida. Never knew anything was wrong because no one had told me that anything was wrong.
I do remember him phoning.
When I had this feeling I should call Richard. He hadn't called me, and I called.
I mean, for sure, I remember him calling.
Yes.
At that point.
Well, yes, I was in Sarasota, Florida. I remember exactly where I was. I was near the airport. I was just coming around a curve, and I was in my old purple Volvo. And I just had this feeling that I should call.
And it was, out of the blue.
And it was funny because Richard said, why did you call today? And I said, I don't know. I just thought I would call. And it ended up that my dad had asked to be taken to the hospital that day.
And he had been told that day that at best he had perhaps, his heart was not in great shape. They didn't have a whole lot of options, I think, for him.
Actually, I was quite perplexed because no one had even told me he was not well. Or even thinking of being not well, but apparently he had been not well.
They had pretty much told him he should, they were going to try and get him stabilized, they were going to send him home, and that 6 months was probably a realistic lifespan, and maybe it could be 9.
I mean, I remember having that feeling I should call.
I asked him, I said, get on a plane tomorrow and get up here.
I wanted to come up right away. My first wife said, oh, no.
I talked to my dad the next morning, maybe around 8:30 or 9 o'clock.
And I didn't think I would tell the story, but I will.
And he had said the day before that they had run a lot of tests on him on the 19th.
Which, of course, I don't know about.
And I remember asking him if he was going to get, his promised day of rest.
So... This is it.
And then all I heard on the phone was beeps and squeaks and pops, like pushing the buttons on the phones, pushing the numbers on the phones.
It was sort of...
I assume from what I know now, he was having a heart attack and had clenched the phone while I was talking to him.
I missed ever seeing him alive again.
So then, of course, I had no way to contact Dave.
He was alive when I got in the air, but he died before I landed.
I certainly was very upset about what was going on, but I knew that I had to go get him at the airport because I wanted to tell him.
He died before I landed. And I met up, and Richard came to the airport. And of course, I didn't know.
So when we got to the airport, carefully, my wife came with me. There was a delay with luggage.
Because of luggage things, and I still didn't know.
There was sort of a glass wall between, people coming from the planes and those of us waiting for people to the planes. And, or coming from, and picking up luggage. Anyway, there was a delay. So we went through this agonizing, I don't know, it felt like an hour. It was probably 10 minutes where I was on one side of the glass and he was on the other side of the glass, but he couldn't hear me and I couldn't hear him, but we could see each other.
That was certainly not a fun moment at all.
I sort of remember, I think I went over and bought, 2 Cokes or something. And when he finally got out, I don't even remember what I said. It was just,
finally I got out, and he had died before I got there. This was not fun. This was not good.
Whatever I said it was something along the lines of, we should stop and have a drink together because, Dad died about an hour and a half ago.
So anyway, off we go to the hospital where we hear that it was sleep apnea.
It was, up until this point, even now, it was absolutely the worst day I've ever lived.
Anyway, my first wife, Lisa,
she could be difficult as well.
I must say this quickly, else I won't be able to say it. So we went through all this, and I had tried to call down to, it was Florida we were living in, several times through the day, but could never get through and could never get a hold of her. But anyway, when I got on the phone with her, she said, well, did you see him? And I thought this an odd question because she knew that I had not gotten here in time while he was alive.
That was, the beginning of the end of...
And I thought this weird, but I said, well, why do you ask? Like, that's a weird question. Why do you ask this?
The beginning of the end of that marriage, that relationship.
And that is when she said, and I don't know what her face looked like, but I can just imagine. But that is when she said, because I want you to suffer as much as possible.
It was a little after that when I guess the decisions were made that Dave was staying in Toronto. And
this was when my first marriage died. And I think something inside me died forever.
Which I'm also sure, and I know, was very difficult because...
my daughter was just not very old.
Dave's daughter was very young. She was months, I guess, old.
And it was hard. It's always been hard being away from Alex, my daughter.
It was very difficult.
She's very smart. She's very intelligent. She's just turned 18.
I can't imagine for myself.
And who knows, maybe someday she'll come and live with me.
She was months, I guess, old when the funeral was.
And that hurts, and that sucks, and that should not be. But
it was a very challenging year on many fronts.
That's the way the ball bounces.
It was very, very hard on him.
It was around the time that my dad died that things fell apart.
And it was very, very hard for us.
I just knew that something had died within me.
My dad died when I was only, I guess I was 20, just turned 26.
And it's now been, let me think, perhaps not quite 20 years, maybe 18 years or so.
We certainly grieved when we did lose him.
Actually, I was quite perplexed because no one had even told me he was not well.
I mean, we all lost a father, and you only get one.
I had no clue.
I mean, we lost my dad in 91, but
nobody told me a thing.
We haven't really got to the point where we have...
It was just sort of never spoken.
It's honestly something we've never really, drunk or sober, ever really sat down and deeply talked about.
It's never really been dealt with.
The constant reminder of that day back in 1991.
The underlying lingering feelings that around not being informed that my dad was not well.
I guess there's still some lingering stuff about...
I think the thing that has divided us most has been the events and happenings around the time that my dad was not well and when he died. And
I seem to remember maybe some conflict around there, but it's, memories and age and all the rest of it have faded the details from my memory.
I remember the last time we spoke, it was not all that pleasant. But I think the effects of the long lingering sleep apnea undealt with did affect him.
Sometimes he had a bit of a temper.
He was at times somewhat difficult, and
not unlike the two of us.
when he got angry, it was angry. It wasn't mild angry.
Sometimes he was a bit of a hothead, and sometimes, we can be too. And I think
He certainly had more of a temper like Richard.
I think of the movie that was called, I think it was Anger Management or something. And I think that's something that my dad struggled with. I know it's certainly under the right circumstances or wrong circumstances, something I struggle with. And I think,
Fortunately for me, I've sort of tried to stay away from that. And unfortunately, I think Richard has
I'm pretty sure at different times, Dave does too.
held on to that trait more than I.
Trying to get back to the part about what kind of man he was.
Generally, I think he tried hard. He wanted to be good at what he did. He was good.
He was an electrical engineer, and as I think he said many times, engineering training was somewhat a way to sort of train the humanity out of you and make you think logically all the time.
He worked probably too hard.
He was very much into his work.
And I think he would acknowledge just that
I think the engineering part took some of the people part out of him, trained it out of him, and I think both Dave and I, even though we do completely different jobs, and I work in IT and he works in the high school,
I knew I wanted to help people. I knew I wanted to work with people.
I think, we really are people, and the fact that I work with people say, oh, you do a computer job. I said, well, no, I work with the people who work with computers.
Right now, I work at a high school. It's called Earl Haig Secondary School, and my official title is hall monitor.
Well, I work at a union, a labor union called the Ontario Public Service Employees Union, and I work in the Information Technology Department.
But it really comes down to much more than that.
I mean, I as much as it is a computer job, I still look at it very much as a people job.
I'm there every day, and I do wander the halls, but mostly people come to me, and with all kinds of troubles, big and small.
He's like big brother to all the kids.
Everything from there's something stuck in the vending machine, and on occasion it gets as high and as serious as people thinking and contemplating and pondering suicide.
People know they can come to me. It's not as often perhaps the shoulder to cry on that sometimes Dave is at his high school.
I don't inflict myself on anybody, but if I see somebody sitting crying in a corner, usually what I'll do is I'll just bring them Kleenex. If they want to talk, I'll listen.
I genuinely care about people and their families and how they're doing, and I will listen.
Well, actually, I think I have to be a good listener. I mean, I've always strived to be a good listener.
I really do like to get to know the people I work with at least a little bit.
As Jesse Owens used to say, if we walk enough and talk enough, we can get it sorted out. So, oh yes, I listen all the time. I listen to all the things they have to say.
I'm the type who will take the 4 or 5 minutes while I'm finishing up setting up a new printer to ask somebody, well, how's things? What are you doing?
I try and know everything there is to know about all the people that are there, whether they be staff, whether they be students.
How's your kids? How's your husband?
Whatever's going on, so that if we do have a crisis, hopefully I don't fuck it up, and I can figure out what to say to get things resolved.
They don't see me as Richard from IT. They see me as Richard, the guy who talks to them. And
when something happens, someone immediately says, get Dave.
There's a lot of those same strengths I know we both have.
Someone will say, well, go find Dave. He helped me with this, or he helped me with that.
I do think we share a lot of strengths.
Little by little, one little person at a time. I just try and make a difference.
We really are people.
I mean, everybody wants to make a difference.
Maybe it's through jokes. Maybe it's through mannerisms. Maybe it's through just listening.
I don't know how I do it exactly. I just try and be fair. I try and be reasonable. And I try to treat people as I would like.
We treat people the way, both of us, the way we would like to be treated.
And I don't think you have to be religious to do unto others.
Whether it's family, whether it's work.
Do what needs to be done to make whatever the situation is best, not based on ideology, but based on what is the right thing to do.
Make the points that have to be made, get the soundbite in, and move whatever the issue is forward.
Like I know that my principal has to be a very strong person, because she knows that on occasion when I get summoned to go down and talk on the radio, I will say it like it is.
You know, standing up for the rights of the people he worked with, and fighting against cuts of people who do the job he does.
And sometimes people don't want to hear that.
I think both of us, when we think we're doing the right thing,
I kind of look at it this way. Sometimes, if there's an issue, I kind of look at it like a pimple.
whatever the issue may be, and
It may be ugly, it may be gross, and when you squeeze it, it might be even grosser. But after a little while, it will calm down and things will return to normal.
and I do the same thing. I think I would,
I know he will speak about his fight with the government and his autistic son.
a direct fight against a government decision that was made
when the government was trying to really screw around with the care and support for all autistic people.
There were kids like my son at that point who was 6 who were almost undeniably some of the most vulnerable people in the society of Ontario, which were essentially being cut off from all of their supports.
This, of course, inflamed and built up the passions within him and lots of people.
I mean, we just went into full out attack,
which I had a minor role in because this was their fight.
And this is an individual thing for me with my son and with Nathan. And what I've had to go through, what I've learned, how we've triumphed and fought and cheered and yelled and cried and set things on fire when we had to. And I mean that literally.
They did get the government to change their mind.
I've got videotape from 1995 with incredible efforts that we made to get media coverage.
And as I said, I was minorly involved in that. That was his fight.
But you know what? He's been on the radio talking about school safety in Toronto. And
I have done other things where I've had to fight with the Board of Education, and I've been on the radio about school safety and school violence and other things.
And every time he's on, I try and listen.
I'm sure he listened to the radio, but in that case, we have sort of found our own place to be.
There's no competition there, but somewhere along the lines, I don't know if maybe we're...
I know he does well at what he does and is respected at what he does, and I do the same. And
there's no competition there, but somewhere along the lines, I don't know if maybe we're kind of thinking, oh, well, he was on the news, so geez, maybe I better try and see what I can do to get on the news. But
on occasion, when I get summoned to go down and talk on the radio, I will say it like it is.
It's true. I believe it's 100% true that...
sometimes somebody has to say that the baby is ugly.
I mean, as much as people hate to say it and hear it and all the rest of it...
I guess it goes back to fighting the battles that need to be fought.
We are very much alike that way.
And certainly my mother...
She was also very community involved as far as,
She was always busy with something. She was actually a teacher.
But after the miracle of twins...
She never did return to it, but she certainly kept busy.
And after we got into our teenage years, she worked.
Generally, her work, too, has been in helping others, whether it be at the Community Information Center, or I remember she worked at Blue Review, which was a children's hospital for kids in wheelchairs.
All sorts of those types of things.
But with a twist of anti-American socialist ways.
Social activism involvement.
So I think we get that from her in that